Okay, so I've started recording. Yeah, we'll just give it maybe like 2 more minutes and then we can get started.
Sounds good.
For the time being, I guess I will go ahead and introduce Johnny. So Johnny, or Jonathan Alhalel, is one of our current T37 trainees. He is currently doing a research year with Chet. And once this, I'm guessing once this year completes, you will return to med school for your fourth year. Yeah. So he is currently in a gap year between before his last and final year of medical school. And so in today's session, he will talk to us about like any sort of like tips, insights, like how to kind of be successful in medical school and like grad school, like anything that can be applicable outside of medical school specifically. So this will be pretty informal. It will just be kind of like a conversation really. And then once Johnny's done presenting, then we will just kind of shift into like a general Q&A sessions for anyone who has questions that they'd like to ask. So I will pass it on to Johnny.
Yeah, and I can share my screen and have a like mini presentation. It's mostly just like pictures, honestly, and I'll be talking through them. But yeah, thank you, Nemo, and thanks everyone for having me here. You know, everyone goes through med school and everyone goes through med school differently. So this will be, you know, my own 2 cents, but I will try to talk while talking through this, you know, describe how some of the people I know, some of my friends or classmates have gone through this, and kind of talk through, you know, best tips and tricks that I came up with. And then I know some of you here have started med school, so and I've even talked to you about, you know, some of those tips and tricks. So for those who have picked up something, feel free to share, and also feel free to ask questions in the middle of presentations, because I know that I always end up forgetting my question. And so because it is fairly informal, it'll be I'm okay with stopping at any point to answer any of these questions. So let me share my screen. Let's see. Can you all see this?
Yep.
That sounds good. Okay. Yeah, so there was already kind of introduction here. And so, yeah, I'm entering my fourth year, and that is a little different. We'll talk about what it kind of looks like, but I might not have so much insight into the year itself. But we can go ahead and get started. So, oh, this is not, let's see if I can go here. Okay. So these are the kind of topics we're going to go through. For those of you that are not familiar with med school, I'll talk through that, and then we'll get through each section. It might help, you know, kind of know a little bit more about each section. And like Nemo said, some of this will be applicable to grad school and some of it won't. I'll try to make it clear where it is, and it will honestly be more towards the start and like the getting started section, just because I feel like the rest of it is pretty specific to medical school. So what is medical school? I'm not going to go into, you know, philosophically or anything like what it is, but basically it's intended to make you well aware of all the systems in the body and make you like be ready to go and be a doctor. And so what that means for the structure, a lot of medical schools have a pretty similar structure, but they vary a lot in sort of what it looks like. But in general, you will have, you know, the first about 2 years is what we like, something that we call like preclinical years. And what that means, and it can also be like 1 year, some schools I think do that. But what that means is, you know, you'll be going to lectures, taking classes in, you know, the sciences and biochemistry and stuff like that, as well as organ systems. You'll also have, you know, anatomy lab where you have cadavers or, you know, deceased bodies, like people who decide to donate their body for learning, and you'll dissect the bodies. There will be classes like ethics. There will be classes like humanities, or, you know, talking about public health more in general, and some other ones sprinkled throughout. that's kind of the structure of the first 2 years. Um, and some of like how those like some schools do, organ system based. So you'll have a system or like a month or whatever of learning, about the cardiovascular system, and you'll take an exam. Others do it differently. That's just how Northwestern did it. It was sort of like, lungs, kidneys, stuff like that, and they go by systems. After that, there's, as many of you probably at least have heard, like board exams called STEP, and I think most grad schools have some sort of exam, like big exam somewhere in the middle. So I'll talk about how to possibly, get ready for that and study for that. But there have been changes to that, mainly being pass fail. So I won't have necessarily the same. There might be different advice there, because a lot of first 2 years is like I felt was gearing up to doing well for step one, because we had grades, but that might be different, and we'll talk about how that might be different. And then we will and then after that you usually have what's called the clinical years, and finally after this whole journey of however long you've been wanting to do medical school, you're finally going to the hospital and seeing patients more commonly or more often than you were before. And that's very exciting, but it's also very nerve-wracking, and we can talk about some of those tips and tricks as well, and anything that you might have questions about during that time. And that's also when a lot of people start figuring out specialties and stuff like that. And so we can definitely go more in depth on that, because I'm still on that process. So some people don't decide it during the third year, but that's something to start thinking about for sure during that time. And then there's fourth year, and that's, applications, interviews, a few rotations still sprinkled throughout, and then this other exam, step two, which might be more important now. So getting started. This is a picture from, I think, first year with me, Nico, and another of our friends, Denise. And I put this on here because for any grad school, but including medical school, I think one of the most important things you can do is make friends. It's going to be crazy throughout the entire time you're in grad school. And, you'll definitely have friends from before and family, and maybe hopefully also in the same city you're in. But when you're in the trenches, I can't describe how, I don't know, how awesome it was to have someone going through it. And then, at times you need someone to help you and they're there for you, or other times you're there for them. And someone going through it with you is invaluable, I think. So I think that's something. I don't want to say stress about it, but definitely make sure you're making time to hang out, rather than just sticking to the inevitable sort of huge water hydrant worth of water, or study your information that's coming at you. And the other part is, studying here is much different than I think studying later on in medical school, or any grad school, because at least I don't know exactly for other grad schools, but I felt like this was a much harder time for me to learn material than college was. I certainly did not build good study habits in college, as it turns out, and I learned that very quickly. So this time period was very much experimental, and because of that, it was less of preparing in some way for like future or learning necessarily, like for like big picture stuff, or what the end goal is, being studying for a big board exam, or learning the material in like a broad sense. This was for me more of like, and what I think it should be for everyone, getting comfortable with your school's material, and if you have exams frequently, being able to be confident in not necessarily acing those exams, because those exams are hard too, but like being comfortable and not nervous going into the exam, like the material, you feel confident that you'll pass those exams. That's the most important thing I felt like getting started there. So yeah, mainly to say that don't be worrying about big board exams at this time. This is for you to get comfortable and work through things. Another big thing I would say about this, and it's really this is not necessarily study related or anything like that, but what I didn't know until I think third year was that for whatever grad school you're in, um, try to figure out what resources and you like and what resources you don't like that the school is providing you. As it turns out, you can kind of sort of like finagle or like work with bargain with the school, I guess, into making some of your tuition cheaper. Actually, I wouldn't say you could probably take I wouldn't say you can take huge chunks out of your tuition, but only in third year did I realize that there were things like um for the one that comes to the top of my mind, even though I enjoyed it, was public transportation. They give us a venture card that gives us infinite access to public transportation here at Northwestern in Chicago. But in third, like after COVID hit, no one was taking public transportation, but they were still covering that. There was like a maybe not necessarily a hidden fee, but there's a fee necessarily for the tuition. It was like $400, $500 where people would pay, and that's basically what was going out to your venture card and how you got all those uh, I wouldn't say free rides, but unlimited access to public transportation. So a lot of like we realized this, and a lot of my class started saying like, we're not taking public transportation because of COVID. So can we get our money back here? And they were, yeah, they were like, oh, this is always, you can like opt in, even though they didn't make that clear. So make sure to look in between the lines for things like that. So figure out what resources you use and you don't use, and see if you can, maybe get back some of that money. Okay. So after, however long it takes you to start figuring out your exams and getting friends, whether it be, a month or 6, 7, 8 months, it's time. It's like this sort of in between time where you're finding your groove, is what I call it. So here is where you're, you don't feel like, I mean, for me, it always felt like I could fail any exam, but you always you feel more comfortable. You feel like you can explore other study resources that aren't necessarily your school's resources. So for us that or for med school, it means other resources that will apply to STEP. I was trying to, a lot of people try to gear more towards using resources that are good and that medical students like for the STEP exam, while also making sure to cover my bases with my in-school lectures. But you gear basically more towards like these board exams studying. So that can vary in how it's done. For me, for instance, we had lectures, and each lecturer tried to do their best to give like a summary guide for their lecture, where they would help you learn some of the things and make it more concise. So for me, I felt like I had to go to like or see the lecture at the very least, even though I'm very bad at taking notes and I'm very bad at learning anything from lectures. So what I would end up doing is like watching a lecture at 3 times speed, which you will get very good at watching things at faster speeds. But I would do that to make sure that anything that a lecturer emphasized, I wrote down. But otherwise, I personally did not take notes. A lot of people did. But where I then spent most of my time was on their summary guide, and highlighted things again that were helping me understand the process of whatever they're trying to explain, and also any big topics that they were doing. And on the side, then it was some resources that honestly were based more towards STEP, and so I'll talk about that in the STEP section. But that's the time to also start incorporating, so doing less on the in-house stuff, and the board stuff becomes more prominent. And then here's also where you start thinking about a specialty, and it's not important that you know what specialty you go into, but it is important that you set yourself up for any specialty. And I say this now, it means a little bit more to me because I'm thinking about ophthalmology, and it's a really competitive specialty. So a little piece of me wishes I could go back and put a little more a little more effort in. Not necessarily in grades, because I felt like I had a nice work-life balance. I wouldn't want to put any more time studying than I did, just for my mental health, but just for, getting more opportunities to necessarily like shadow in different specialties or do research in different specialties. Because for most specialties, I would say, and I don't know this for sure because I'm not, a program director in any residency, but for most specialties, showing that you've done research, that is good enough. They're like, they enjoy that, they like that, and you're good to go. It's almost a check mark. But there are certain specialties, and a lot of these are the more competitive ones, ophthalmology or orthopedic surgery or dermatology. They prefer to see that you've had, some amount of longitudinal interest, or, just that you've done research in their field. So if you're interested in any of those, and even if you're not delving into doing some of that research, is not a bad idea. Um, but starting to, maybe figure out if you would be interested in any of those specialties, starting to, look into them, and doing a little more work in that area would be a good idea. And then other things, mainly just finding what you're passionate about, and that means, doing a million different things that your school is offering, whether it be volunteering or uh, in different places, whatever it is. Being able to either follow the reasons why you got into med school, or um, or find new ones, I think is incredibly important. Because for one, that's what's going to drive you, right? In the end, a lot of this, unfortunately, is a game to, get into residency, and figure out, be the best um, applicant you can be. But more importantly, in the future, it's to be a good doctor. You're here to enjoy what like be able to help patients, and enjoy that process. And the most important part about that, I think, well, I wouldn't say the most important part about that, but those two are vital pieces that work together. You cannot help your patients if you are not happy. um, and so I think that finding, what drives you and what keeps you going will help you ultimately be a better doctor. So here's the time to, find that piece that you're passionate about. um, yeah. So step one, congrats to everyone who is not in my class or the class below me, because it is now pass fail. That has implications that people don't fully quite understand yet, but we have uh, ideas of what that might mean. But basically, this is awesome news. This takes off so much stress in the first 2 years. And so some of the things I said before about finding your groove, it helps you be able to do that. You still want to, do like study for this exam, but it's going to be much easier to swallow the studying. And so finding your groove doesn't necessarily mean you have to do it earlier, like, because people they'll start talking about how they're studying for step one exam during first year of medical school, which I think is ridiculous. But like, this means that you can take it at your own pace, and start whenever you feel comfortable with starting. Because I think with the information, and I don't think that, like, the cutoff for passing is going to be that much more difficult or any more difficult. What I forgot to mention is that each school kind of gives you a block of time to study for step one and two, where that is the sole duty of you as a student is to study for step. So I'm not necessarily saying that's like then you should only study then, but I think makes it way more viable for you to only focus on step at that time and still like pass comfortably, rather than starting way earlier like some people were doing before. So I think that's a good thing to be able to help you focus on whatever other things you need during your first and second year. And that is to say as well, like, I had the, maybe not luxury, but I I didn't have to work or care for a family, or other things that certainly other people do have to do. So I had more time to study during, I started studying for step at the beginning of the so how do I say it? Basically the middle of my second year, the beginning of the year, like in January, when I was gonna take the exam in, I think, April. But a lot of people, may not be able to do that, or people who other people started early in that, and so this gives you the luxury to be able to focus on other things, I think, which is amazing. But that being said, it is a big exam. It is an important exam. So this is just a list of study resources, but I'll talk through what some of these mean and what was most helpful to me and what maybe was also most helpful to others that I spoke to. So basically the most important resource going into either one of these step exams is going to be a question bank, like by UWorld, or that's like I don't know, the company that does it. And these are expensive. Most of these things are going to be expensive. So I would say, also talk about these either with your classmates to get discounts, which we were able to do through most of these, or through to your school, and see if they can help pay for these. I have examples of both that really stood out to me and was very helpful and could be brought to other schools. So, or I mean, maybe they're doing it either way. But for the first UWorld like question bank, I think they're like $400, $500. And I'm not sure on the price because what happened is for the first one, all of our like student base got together and we emailed and said, look, if we have 100 people buy through through our school, whatever, will you give us a discount? And they did, and they gave us like $150 discount, I think it was, for everyone at our school. And the second time around, there like for step 2, you have to get UWorld again. And so actually our like student board went to our deans and said, hey, you know what, like this was expensive. This is prohibitory for a lot of our students. Will you find a way to, make it less so? And so they actually refunded our school, our deans refunded all of our step 2 like UWorld costs, which is amazing. So both of those are viable ways to, and I'm sure there are others, to basically help you pay for some of these things. So remember that. In addition to that question bank, there are other question banks that people use. Personally, I did not use, for step 1, I only used UWorld as a question bank, but to supplement that, Amboss I know has like, I hope they still have this, but like the 2-week free trials. And when you're studying for a 6-week process, 2 weeks is a lot of time to use it. So that could be a good one to go through. And I definitely use that for step 2. So, and I did find it helpful. So it might be good for step 1 as well. And then practice exams, there are a lot out there, and they kind of also give you like a sort of practice exam, and they'll actually be directly from like the board or whoever does like administers these step exams. So these are very helpful because they are actual questions that have been retired and are very important for you to do, and they also give you a sort of like where you would fit, what score you would sort of get if you were taking the exam at that time. Which UWorld also has two exam. I just want to go back real quick. UWorld is also helpful because it has 2 like practice exams that are pretty fair. I think it's like one of the more predictive exams for what you'll get. So that was cool. But they are supposed to be taken at a certain time. One is like a month before, and they add, like if you are on this trajectory, you will get this score in the future. It's not what you're getting at that time, so it's important to note as well. Then other resources, Boards and Beyond, is one that I used more actually to study during the years for my in-house exams than I did for step, because it helped me and it's helped others basically understand topics more easily. It breaks things down pretty well, and it helps tie connections together that I think were hard to necessarily understand during my in-house lectures, especially because you'll have a variety of lecturers which with like lecturing ability, and so this person is pretty consistent and pretty good, or people. There are several. And then for me, this is near and dear to my heart, the Sketchy Medical and Pixorize. these are basically, and I have a picture on the next slide to kind of show it, but these are basically like art or like pictures that help you help like you remember certain like connections and topics in medicine. So it can be anything like especially for, and I would say for like all the medications and all the like microbiology stuff you get, like bacteria, viruses, fungi, that you'll have to learn. There's so many random names and so many random things they do, that this helps connect, the picture, by giving you a tie to like um, what that individual thing is and the things it does. And then the last ones are pathoma. That's like, does a lot of pathology, which is like slides, and talking about what happens to cells, but also breaks down some of the topics that are harder to understand. And that person as well does a good job of making things clear and making connections. And lastly, Anki. If you haven't heard of Anki, it's just a like virtual or online like flashcard deck type of thing, where you can build your own. Or if you go through like Reddit for medical students, there are a million Anki decks that have been pre-made for step 1, step 2, for shelf exams, which are exams you take in third year. And so a lot of those are pre-made and ready for you. And personally, I I couldn't have done it without those flashcards, and I certainly couldn't have done it without other people making them for me, because flashcards take forever to make. Some people enjoy making flashcards, that it helps them remember it better, and so that's your own personal preference. But just so you know, there are great sources online, and that would be, I mean, there might be new ones, but the consensus is like Zonky is one that's like fantastic, but it's just enormous, and so um, that's something to note. And Anki was also helpful and vitally important. I just want to tie it in back to like the sketchy medical and pixelized. These are mnemonic type things. You can see it once and you might hold like, a connection or two that it made for you, but being able to see the picture multiple times and see how it connects multiple times will help you better remember this like sort of picture in your mind better later on. So that's good. And so this is Pixarized one. This is one that was newer, and I didn't get to use as much because it had just started, but I actually enjoyed it a little bit more than Sketchy. But basically, I forget what topic this is, but I just wanted to point out like certain things, like they'll have a topic, like whatever it may be. It looks like this is sort of something biochemical, like a pathway. And so, there are certain pathways like GS and GI. And so how they tie that in is, this is like a GI soldier. So, that's the start of the process. And then camp, so cyclic AMP they use with like a camp, and that's like basically they make it so that all these like pathways and stuff are circular, and you kind of understand what's going on by seeing a picture, basically, or by remembering this picture. It's very helpful. Are there any questions? I'm just continuously talking, but and we can also hold them to the end because I'm almost done, but feel free. One second. So what I'll say about clinical rotations, and a lot of this now, like these end parts, I wouldn't say you should worry about them now, but knowing, because they're so far in advance and there's a lot before this, but it is important to remember, at least, and hopefully you hear this over and over again in medical school. But the most important thing I realized in clinical rotations is that you have to be pleasant to be around, and that sucks because you can't be nice or pleasant every day, but you have to be able to put that face on as much as possible, even though you're waking up at like 4:30 in the morning or whatever it may be. But that goes a long way in like when you're there, because people enjoy and they feel like you added to the team, even if you added something clinically or not. And maybe not most importantly, but also make sure that this includes your co-student. There are a lot of rules you'll hear about, how you should work with your co-student, but generally it's, be friendly, help them out, don't talk over them, don't take their patient or do anything over their like the stepping over them that is rude, and your residents and attendings will notice, and it does not go well. Some students don't get that memo and they will do that to you, and it's going to be very frustrating. But just trust in the system that that will people notice it, and it won't uh, affect you negatively, even if it's not caught every time. Um, and come in excited and learning, and like to learn and help. This is vital because you're like, I would say 90% of the time you won't know what's going on in some way, shape, or form. But that's not necessarily what attendings or residents are looking for. Um, it's one, like, once you realize something you don't know, you know, either if you have downtime that day or that night, um, make sure to come back and be like, hey, I read up on this. These are some cool things I noted. And not necessarily give a presentation, but just informal kind of like, hey, I was reading up on this, I was learning about this. And that can be a tricky thing to do because you don't always just want to like come back and be like, look, I did my homework or whatever. You don't want to necessarily show up every day and be like, it's like say it outright. You kind of want to make it look like be organic. So if you like, for instance, if you're holding a patient and you learn something about that patient, next day be like, oh, and like in your plan for what to do that day for your patient, be like, oh, and I looked this up and it seems like this is the best pathway, like, you know, for how to treat this patient. Um, don't just be walking in the door and be like, hey, I learned this today. Um, yeah. And then these rotations have both their well, different schools will grade them differently. Um, I think most schools still have grades for clinical rotations, just what goes into that grade is different. So the things that could be um, could be put into that grade or part of that grade is one, your like how your attendings grade you, like the residents and attendings will put in a grade, and that's one, and that's how you do clinically. Two is there usually be like a small portion of like little tasks or like assignments you have to do, whether it be or whatever it is, and that'd be a small portion. You should get that 100%. That shouldn't be something hard to do. You should get those points because they're free points. And then lastly, there might be something I'm missing, but lastly is at the end of each rotation for your third year, there's what's called a shelf exam. It's another one of these exams that the big like boards people like make for, and it's specific to each like section or rotation you're doing, and that could also be a part of your grade. And so why this matters is if each one is important and weighed differently, like how do you manage figuring out what's more important or where to put your time. And so an easy one is, at least now in Northwestern, those shelf exams are pass fail now. It wasn't the case in my year, and so it's easier now to invest more of your time in the clinical portion, and that's nice. But if you don't have that, which I didn't, I would say, or at least the way I structured it, and or at least the way I ended up structuring it that worked the best for me, because I didn't do so hot initially, was at the beginning of the rotation, I walked into the rotation thinking my first few days are here to like learn what is important for each resident or attending, learning basically how the hospital or clinic or whatever it is functions. And so and I don't think many people expect that much of you the first couple of days, so it's easy to not necessarily do a bunch of research about your patient, but just like get your bearings. And in that first week I would focus a lot of my like studying um, to like for the shelf exam, kind of then when I had the most time. So that meant for me, it meant I actually had like small Anki decks that I found on Reddit that were specific to the shelf exam, and I worked through that because with flashcards, it's like learning it, and then there's the the part where you're just like kind of like remembering it, I guess, getting it from your like long-term memory. So once I've done like if I've done all of the learning part, then the rest of the part for the rest of the rotation is just remembering it, and those flashcards go much quicker. So I structured it by learning kind of on the front-loaded learning, and then I did a lot more of the, researching my patients and like coming back with topics to talk about the later parts of the clinical rotations. And that is going to vary for everyone how you study for that, but that is how I managed to do it, and it worked out by the end. And then I think this is the end here for basically after clinical rotations after your third year. I just want to say, I guess, about clinical rotations. This is extremely important or this is where most people, maybe not extremely important, and most people figure out at the very least what type of field they want to go into, not necessarily a specialty, but you'll come to learn that you hate surgery, that whatever it is, and so you'll start figuring out more and more what you like to do, what you want to do, and then a lot of people also just figure out what they want to do, and part of that is making sure that you incorporate some time in your third year to do rotations in areas where you think you're interested. So they usually you'll have, like a month and a half or 2 months that you can sprinkle in where you can do 2-week or 4-week rotations in certain other fields that aren't your like core clinical rotations that your school forces you to do or makes you do. And so that's a good time to do that. I don't have much to say about step 2, except that now, because of step 1 being pass fail, I do think, and people think that step 2 will be much more important for residencies. And that means basically that, well, I guess I don't know how much time people get for studying. For us, you have to build your own time with your schedule. We have like, I think it's 20 weeks over third and fourth year where you can have off to do kind of whatever you want, including some electives or like rotations that you are interested in, but not necessarily core ones. And so you can build however much time you want to study out of that. People now might want to take more time. I intended to take 2 weeks to take step 2, but I think the average is 3 or 4 weeks. And I intended to do that because I just kept up with those flashcards I was talking about doing during third year. I just kept on doing the long-term memory retrieval stuff from every previous rotation throughout third year, which was a little more investment, but it meant that I was ready to just take step 2 basically immediately after my third year because I had remembered all of my shelf exam studying, which is a way to do it. A lot of people don't do that. A lot of people will wait. And something of note here is that step 2 for some specialties currently is not required. So if you don't want the pressure or don't need the pressure, more importantly, you could bypass taking step 2 and just apply. I think that will change because now step 1 is pass fail, but I don't know for sure. And the difference between step 2 and step 1 is it's much less like biochemistry and pathways and a lot more clinical reasoning, next steps after diagnosis. And in the end, even though there will be a lot of pressure on this exam versus step 1 for residencies, I do think it's more appropriate because it's a more clinical exam, more, type of, I guess, reasoning that you will have to do as a clinician. And then I won't go through the resources the same way, but because there's less time, and I guess previously it was less important, I used fewer. Most people use fewer. Yeah, and I can't say much about the application process yet, which is coming up, but I've been learning about it. So if you have questions about that as well, feel free to ask.
Thank you, Johnny. If anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute. I have a few, so I can get started. Otherwise, anyone else can unmute and ask a question at this time.
And that was the last thing you needed to, if you needed to sink in, that's okay too.
I guess one question that I had was, what were some things that you considered when choosing which medical school to go to?
Yeah, I would say I knew this, and I knew to look for this because my brother was in medical school and he told me to look for this, and I stand by what he told me as one of the most important things, and that is, if, like, I guess what proportion, or if your exams, for at least for the first 2 years, are pass fail, that makes a huge difference in so many ways. So for one, it makes it so that you and your classmates aren't so competitive. It becomes more of a collaborative learning experience. Um, and so if you're the type of learner who likes study groups, then that is, it's more collaborative, it's more helpful. But even if that isn't the case, we had a lot of resources where someone found some like study resources from whatever other years, and they would just post it in our big like group chat thing. And I don't know necessarily how that would have worked, if that would have been the same in schools that don't have pass fail, but that was one of the more important things, and something I stand by. Other things to think about, you know, for me as well, are the city that you're going to be in, whether that means enjoying the city, or like opportunities for things that you can do in the city that will help you relax when you need to relax, because that is important. um, that could be family, that could be it being a big city, so there's like lots of great museums or food, or you're somewhere near outdoorsy place, like Denver or the West Coast, or I mean there's outdoors everywhere. But you pick and choose a city or area for certain reasons that help you be a regular person and cool down. I think that was big for me. Um, what else? I think for me, and it was a little, well, you also wanted to look at, I think now, looking back, like you want to look at maybe like the patient population you're working with, and if you have a patient population they have in mind, I think that's important to assess as well. Um, yeah, and then there's no, I wouldn't say like ranking is an end all be all, but if you have that opportunity to choose one over the other, that certainly will help for residency, I think. And then maybe one of the most important things is, like funding or scholarship or whatever it is in that scenario, that I think under like is a just like the subtext of all of this, is like probably the most important thing, and a big um, a huge thing that I tell, like I talk to people who are deciding what medical school to go to, that have interviewed at Northwestern. One of the biggest things, or biggest tips I offer, is that once you're in medical schools, some will inevitably offer some amount of money, others will offer less or more. And if you really want to go to a place that's offering you less money than a different place, don't hesitate to shoot an email to someone at that school, to be like, hey, to say that outright. I mean, obviously word it in like appropriately, but to say, hey, and I think this could work for grad schools too, probably. But hey, I really want to go to your school. It's for X, Y, and Z reasons, it's my top choice. But as it turns out, I'm getting or like I don't know how to word this exactly. I forgot how I worded mine, but like I'm getting more money here. Is there any way you can match that? That would help me make the decision easier, and make me be able to go to your institution. I think that is very important, especially for allowing you to go where you want to go.
Great, thank you. Do we have any audience questions? Otherwise, oh, okay. Kevin has a question in the chat. So he said, you mentioned that for competitive specialties, it's important to get specific research early on. How do you do this without narrowing your match chances in other fields?
Yeah, I guess I would say broaden it, maybe not necessarily to, so, okay. So if you think you're interested in any competitive specialties, and even if you don't think you are, I would say the first thing to do would be, shadow or go volunteer in those areas. I think that will help. One, if you end up doing that, or if you end up wanting to do that specialty, to say like, hey, look, I did this early on. It doesn't necessarily have to be research. It's just like, I showed interest this early on. So there's some amount of longitudinal experience in that specialty at the very least. So that could help. That's step one. But for research specific, if you delve into that research and decide to do that, I would say that's true. There's always pros and cons to doing research for that exact reason, that wherever you decide to put in effort, you're not putting in effort in other specialties, right? So I think it's important to, I guess, I'll just reiterate a little bit of what I was talking about before, that a lot of specialties find research important. And so just having research is not a bad thing. And basically meaning that you, having completed that research, checks that box for research for a lot of specialties. And then if you decide to do that, competitive specialty, it checks like that extra box. Of course, that like extra box is left unchecked for whatever other specialty, but unless you're confident, that what specialty you want to do in, you're basically like pulling like a lottery ticket, right? You're saying whatever research you decide to do in your first years, is that really going to be what you decide to do ultimately? I don't know. If you're more confident in that, I would say, do research in that field if you think what you want to do, and avoid the more competitive one. I think the tip that I was going for is more of like, if you think you are interested in this specialty, there's more benefit to risk by doing research specific to that more competitive specialty. But there's pros and cons to it. I don't know if that helps.
Hey, Johnny, I had a question for you. You said that you started study for step one in January of the year that you took step one, and you
Correct.
were using UWorld. So I'm wondering if you could kind of tell me how you use UWorld, like how many questions you did a day and how you were able to review with that. That'd be pretty interesting.
Yeah. So if I remember correctly, what I did to start, I started in January, and we had like 2 or 3 more. We did it by organ system. So organ system like modules left for in school before my time to dedicated time to start studying for STEP. So what I did specifically was use UWorld for those specific modules, just because one, it was helping me learn that information for STEP and what's more applicable to from that area or organ system for STEP, but also making sure I hit the bases for my like in school exams as well. So I think I remember having OB-GYN because I was interested in it, OBGYN. So I remember and I can't remember the number of questions at that time for when I was in school, how many I was doing a day, but I made sure to finish the UWorld section for OBGYN while I was in OBGYN, just so that I can kind of hit two or whatever, do the two birds one stone analogy. And then the same thing, I think the one after that might have been like hematology, oncology. I think I did the same thing there. But then when it came to, but then one of the, during that time as well, one of the things I did most of in the time before studying for like dedicated time for STEP was using those resources, the sketchy, to, learn all the not random, but really hard to learn pharmacology and microbiology that I didn't know, and then use Anki decks that were online to, reinforce those, because that just in general helped with retention and like sort of hitting the ground running for my dedicated steps time. And so I probably did, they're long, and I couldn't really speed those up because they make a lot of connections that I felt like I had to learn. So I probably watched like 1 or 2 a day and did the Anki that tied to them that same time. And then when it came to dedicated study time there, it became I had a more dedicated, like a more structured how many questions I would do a day. I would say that people land differently here because people either like started UWorld like a year ago, or people are just starting UWorld. So one, I think you should just kind of, the way I did it was kind of divided the number of UWorld questions I had left with the number of days I had left. I think that is the right math. And that, gave me like I had to do 80 questions a day, or it might have been 120. Can't remember. It was a lot. 120 questions a day to be able to finish beforehand. And in the end, I didn't actually finish UWorld, but because they add questions throughout. But that's kind of how I structured it, and it's very helpful to have if you have someone at your school, which I think most schools have, like a planner or like a study planner person, someone that helps you basically set up your schedule for studying for STEP. That they could be very useful in helping you do that. But then once I had that schedule of like 120 questions a day, I would basically do a block of 40, so I could sit down and learn to be able to not fidget and like sort of get my test taking skills, to like improving my test taking skills. So sit and do and I think it's an hour long, 40 questions, and then after that I would go over the questions, and I would go over all the questions. That's important. Even if you got it right, a lot of the time you'll like thought you knew why you got it right, but you might not. And so like spending like 2 minutes on the questions you got right and like 5 questions on the questions you got wrong to learn about what happened. And then as time went on, as I got closer, I would do, instead of a 1 hour 40 block, if I was doing 100 questions a day, I would ramp it up to 2 hours and 80 questions, and then 3 hours and 80 questions and 120 questions, just so I could start like getting into that testing mode. But definitely take 1 day off a week. Definitely take breaks. Don't like every day do that like 3 hours straight and stuff like that. Like that, it gets to be a lot. So just pace yourself. Did that help?
Yes, that was very, very helpful. Thank you.
Cool.
So we have just about 5 minutes left. If anyone wants to ask like one last question, you can also submit your questions to.
I have a
Oh
quick
yes,
question.
Critter. Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, can you guys hear me okay? So I have a question about the whole like medical school application process. So I know for people kind of coming in like myself, it can be a little overwhelming. So I wanted to kind of get your perspective on some of the techniques you use to kind of like leverage your opportunities when you were developing your MCAT application. Like, one of the things I'm working on right now are like your 15 like questions or experiences. The blurbs is what I like to call them. How did you use up like all of the blurbs, or did you do some? Where are some of the things and techniques that you used?
Yeah, I think I can't remember exactly, but I feel like it's going to be pretty similar to me applying for residency now. And so what I would say is I'm almost 99% certain I didn't fill all those. The way I approached it and would approach it is, make sure you have, X number. I couldn't say how many any individual has, but like to hit the top ones that you're most passionate about, and really, go in depth about those like topics, whatever it may be, and make sure certainly that you're thinking through those, and make sure you hit all of those. Then after that, I would approach the next, X or Y number with some things that I know that I did that like I can, but most importantly that I can talk through. If you get an interview and they're like, oh, this thing was interesting, and then you're like, oh yeah, like, and you don't have anything to say about it, like you were, tangentially associated or whatever it is, and you're not confident in what the process was or what you did, basically that's when I wouldn't add it. I think that would be the most important thing, just because if it doesn't look great if you're just like, oh yeah, that's something I threw on there, but don't really know much about. And for a number, like, I would double check with like sources maybe online. Like I don't know how helpful Reddit could be, but I've gotten a lot of my answers from Reddit. But just like feel out how many people or how many questions or blurbs or people are filling out. A number I would aim for 10 to 12. Unless you have all 15, then that's absolutely wonderful if you do. But filling out most, making sure that you can go through them well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we're just at about 2 minutes left if anyone has like an additional question. Otherwise, feel free to send your questions to myself or Jackie. And Johnny also put his email in the chat, so you can reach out to him as well. Yeah, thank you all for attending today's event. It has been recorded, so we will share those as well if you would like. But yeah, I don't know if Jackie or Samantha, if either of you have anything to add.
Thank you, Johnny, so much. I really appreciate learning from your presentation. I did not attend medical school. I went to grad school, so I learned a lot about the process and the experience. And I also trained as a nurse, so that's very different way of learning and training. So I just really appreciated hearing your story and your experiences and your wisdom.
Awesome, thanks. Hopefully some of it you felt like was applicable, or I don't know, that actually felt like grad school stuff too.
Yeah, there's a lot of overlap, and in the future, perhaps if folks are interested, we can have other conversations about graduate programs in that process as well, and compare and contrast with medical school.
Okay, I think we're nearing time, so I guess we can end here. And again, thank you, Johnny, for presenting and sharing your story.
Thank you for having me.
Have a good day, all.
Bye, everybody.